Chapter 19 October 1973, Shanghai. The alarm woke Zoe precisely at 6:30 a.m., as always. She dressed quickly and then hurried down to make the usual breakfast porridge, finishing her own bowl just as her daughter, Little Red, appeared to quietly claim her own. Nannying was still asleep in a bed next to the chest of drawers. When Zoe moved to Shanghai, she was determined to have her mother and Little Red move in with her, grateful that at last she could have her family all in one place. Zoe knew that Mama could not part with the house in Beijing. It held too many precious memories of Mama and Dad living together. Although the family home had been reduced to only one room after the government took over the majority of the house during the Cultural Revolution. Zoe could feel the deep sorrow inside Mama whenever she recalled how Baba had suffered after being branded a reactionary academic and all the physical and mental torture he endured before he died. With Baba no longer alive and Mama's pulmonary edema, Lanying looked lonely and fragile. At first, Lanying had refused to move to Shanghai, insisting that she could still take care of herself. But when Zoe persisted, arguing she needed Mama's help to look after Little Red so she could concentrate on her new job, Lanying finally agreed. The one-room apartment was simple, small for 3 people, but comfortable enough to accommodate daily life. The communal kitchen, shared with 5 other neighbors, served as a community center where they could work together and socialize. Unlike Little Red, Lanying found the local dialect incomprehensible. But with some guessing, hand gestures, and lots of laughter, she was able to connect with their neighbors. At last, Zoe felt she could fulfill her duty as both mother and daughter, and pay back everything her parents had given her. She had her own home, a real home, a place where she could laugh and talk freely without fear or intimidation. "Mama, you look beautiful," Little Red said through a mouthful of porridge. "Thank you," Zoe smiled, smoothing the black and white checked shirt. One of the things she loved about her new life was that no one frowned over her choice of clothes. No longer constrained by Chairman Mao and his wife's dress code, she felt free to indulge in her feminine side. "Can you get home a little early today? I have some questions I need to ask you for one of my assignments." "Can it wait until the weekend? Today I'm accompanying the Minister of Energy on an inspection tour, so I'm afraid I'll be home quite late." Zoe smiled, amazed at how quickly Little Red had adapted to their new life. At just 10 years old, Little Red had become fluent in the local dialect in less than 6 months and made many friends at school. She was even elected vice-class president. Zoe had never imagined her daughter would be so confident and outgoing. "Okay," Little Red smiled, proud of her mother's scientific knowledge and important position at the institute. Zoe checked on Lanying, who was still dozing in the bed, and then closed the door quietly as she left. After the dim room and crowded kitchen, the brilliant autumn sun in the front courtyard momentarily blinded her. She closed her eyes until her vision adjusted to the light, and then she found her bike propped against the concrete wall. Usually, only one gate panel was open, but today both stood wide, creaking as they swung in the morning breeze. She bolted one side, admiring the Western-style facade of her building that reminded her of Berkeley. Lingering, her fingers curled around the bars of the gate as she lost herself in a moment of nostalgia. John's apartment had the same look, the same filigrees and lattice work. John. He would be 50 years old now, a professor if he had stayed at Berkeley, or perhaps a prominent researcher for some prestigious organization. Maybe he had 3 or 4 grown-up children by now. He always said he wanted a big family. Does he still think of me? Or even remember me? She mused. With a short laugh, she dismissed the pointless fantasy. Why would a man like John, a man with a happy family, a beautiful wife, a successful career, think about a stubborn, selfish woman who had jilted him almost 25 years ago? She had made her choice, and this was her life now. With a deep breath, she repeated the words she'd said so often before. That's over. Move on. Climbing on her bike, she pedaled toward Institute 1970. Zoe loved her job. Although the construction of the plant was a top-secret project, internally the relaxed environment meant no restriction on communications between the Institute's departments. Most of the staff had been hand-picked from key government research institutes and factories all over China, and with Mandarin as the common language, Zoe quickly developed a comfortable rapport with them. Best of all, she finally felt she was applying her skills and knowledge to a positive project that would truly help her people and her country. Today was a special day. As part of a delegation with the Minister of Energy, Zoe was touring the Qinshan nuclear power plant construction site. On the way, the convoy stopped in Haiyan County. The minister, Zoe, the other scientists, and a troop of soldiers all crowded into a restaurant for a break and some lunch. Several people already waiting for seats stepped aside without so much as a murmur. With so much propaganda touting the virtues of the People's Liberation Army, most citizens had great respect for and trust in any military personnel. The local people considered it a great honor to have the new facility built so close to their town, even though they had no idea what it was actually for. The friendly waitress smiled when she saw Zoe. "Coming to see your husband at the army base?" Zoe smiled and nodded. This was her 13th trip to the plant, and she hardly recognized the white lie as a deception anymore. She had been eager to get out of the van, but in the crowded restaurant, the air tasted stale. A ceiling fan hung motionless overhead, and she considered asking the waitress to turn it on. As if reading her mind, the waitress said with a shrug, "Sorry, there's no power today. It happens fairly often. We're used to it. What can you do?" She smiled back, understandingly, casting her mind back to her first day at Institute 1970. Walking through the lobby, Zoe was surprised to find a woman sitting inside the elevator filing her fingernails. Before Zoe could even walk into the elevator, the woman looked up and said casually, "No electricity, you have to use the stairs." And she'd never forget the director's first words to her. "Nuclear power is critical to the motherland. We simply don't have enough resources to produce the electricity we need. For this country to move forward, to be competitive, we must develop nuclear energy facilities. That's why you're here." At the time, she thought the director was overstating the importance of the project. But now, after 3 years in Shanghai, she'd seen firsthand how the shortage of electrical power affected society, and she was glad for having this predestined opportunity to redeem herself and do good for her country. After lunch, the delegation endured another hour and a half on the bumpy road in the stuffy, cramped truck. When they finally arrived, Zoe sucked in a deep lungful of the salty sea breeze, reinvigorated and eager to start work. "Welcome, Minister Xu, to the Qinshan nuclear power plant," greeted Director Wen at the entrance to the administration building, shaking hands all around with an enthusiastic smile. "I'm sure you'll find the inspection tour enlightening." In the administration building's main corridor, he handed everyone a hard hat, disposable shoes, and a coat, apologizing. "Sorry, everyone is required to wear these. Regulations, you know, while the construction is going on around us. Everyone ready then? Let's go." Zoe was amazed at how quickly construction had progressed. The 8-lane driveway looked to her like a huge dragon, stretched out, ready to swallow the cluster of buildings. The reactor was little more than a pit at this stage, but the gaping hole gave some indication of its massive scope. Concrete blocks curved in a graceful arc all the way to the sea, almost a kilometer away. As they walked toward the control center, she remarked to Minister Xu, "6 months ago, when I came here, the site was still just a huge dirty beach. Now it looks like a modern city." "Yes, we are working very hard. Construction runs 24 hours a day in 3 shifts. In fact, we're actually ahead of schedule. I anticipate the plant will be completed in 3 years," boasted Director Wen. "I'm sure the schedule was well thought out, so perhaps we should stick with it. Don't advance prematurely," warned Minister Xu. Zoe nodded, wishing that all government officials followed his reasonable and considered approach. "It's a beautiful place, but it's so far from our cities, and there's no nearby infrastructure. Why was this site chosen instead of some other more convenient place?" asked Minister Xu, staring at the sea shimmering in the distance. "And how will we connect the power it will produce into the existing grid once it's finished?" Director Wen looked at Zoe, his look instructing her, as the engineer, to answer the question. "After extensive research, we determined that a pressurized water reactor system is most suitable for our needs. It costs less to build and run, and this location has all the required resources. First, obviously, the seawater is a primary resource. Second, Shanghai is reasonably close for access to the Design Institute and manufacturing facilities. Third, it is far enough away from populated areas to assure public safety in case of a nuclear incident." Zoe looked at Minister Xu, who encouraged her to continue with a nod. "Plus, we will only need to connect about 20 kilometers of cable to connect the power output to the existing electric grid." "You said pressurized water. What is the pressure?" 150 atmospheres at 318 degrees Celsius. "Which means the reactor must be extraordinarily strong." "Yes, the tower requires welded steel 203 millimeters thick. The Shanghai Turbo Generator Factory is manufacturing a 300 megawatt turbo generator for this plant." She was surprised that the minister wasn't aware of the specifications, but he smiled, impressed with her explanation. "Good. You've obviously done your homework. I just hope all the component manufacturers are as competent." She nodded her thanks, slightly embarrassed by his praise. Still, it was good to feel confident and satisfied with her work again. By 7 o'clock, the setting sun was spreading its last glow over the city. Like most other buildings in Shanghai's Suqiaowei district, Institute 1970 displayed a defensive rather than decorative exterior. A high, solid concrete wall, rimmed with shards of glass and topped with razor wire, surrounded the complex. Completing the imposing facade, all the windows of the lower floors hid behind iron bars, and 2 scowling soldiers flanked the black iron gate. The first time Zoe saw the building, she thought it was a jail. Tonight, the 2 guards flashed a smile as she yanked open the small door that simplified access through the heavy gate. Even before she wheeled her bicycle out of the carport, however, the security officer dashed out of the building. "Meng Zuyi, your daughter called this afternoon. Your mother is sick. You need to get home as soon as possible." Thank you. I will." She jumped on her bicycle, her legs pumping harder as concern mounted to anxiety. What could have happened? It must be serious, or Siu Hong would not have called. Fortunately, the streets were mostly empty. All the shops were closed, and only a few street sellers were still out with their 3-wheeled bikes. Zoe turned down a narrow alleyway, a shortcut that was usually too crowded to save time. There were no streetlights. She swerved hard to avoid a cluster of people who were sitting in front of their homes enjoying the cool fall air before going to bed. "Hey, watch it!" someone shouted after her, but she was already gone. Breathless, she flew through the courtyard gate, flung her bike against the wall, and darted into her unit. "Mama?" she called almost before the door was open. There was no reaction. Lang Ying's face was ashen, and her pulse barely registered under Zoe's frantic fingers. Little Red sat huddled on a chair next to the bed, her face miserable. "What happened?" "She was fine when I got home from school. About 4 o'clock, when I was out playing hopscotch with some friends in the front courtyard, I heard a big thump. I ran in and found her lying on the floor, on her back." Little Red swiped her hand across her eyes. "I couldn't lift her by myself. The neighbors helped me put her on the bed. She's been like that ever since." Her eyes full of tears, Little Red looked at Zoe. "It's all my fault. I shouldn't have gone outside." "Oh, baby, you didn't do anything wrong. It was an accident," Zoe soothed, wrapping her arms around Little Red. "But we need to take her to the hospital now for a thorough examination. She may have internal injuries or something like that." Little Red nodded, trying to smile. "Mama, do you think she will recover from the stroke?" asked Little Red, her gaze on Lan Ying's empty bed across the room. She turned back to Zoe, only pecking at her dinner. Zoe knew how much Little Red loved Lan Ying, and how strong the bond between them was. Choosing her words carefully, she tried to be as gentle as possible. "The doctor said strokes are hard to predict, but she could be in a coma for another week, maybe longer. Even after she wakes, she probably won't be the same as before. I hope that she'll still be able to do basic things. We just have to be patient." She pushed her plate away, as uninterested in food as Little Red. Without Lan Ying, the dining table seemed empty, the food tasteless. To shake off the worry, she stood up and started clearing the table. "What's the assignment you asked me about? What do you want to know?" "I have to write a 500-character article describing the person I admire the most. I thought I'd write about Baba. Wei Po and Wei Gong told me he was an army officer and very handsome, but that's all I know. They don't have any photos of him, and you've never shown me any either," said Little Red, putting her exercise book on the table. "Do you have any? Do I look like him?" Zoe busied herself with the dishes to avoid answering right away. She washed the few dishes, covered the leftover food with plates, and put the food in the pantry. Finally, she turned back to Little Red's expectant face. "No, you don't look like him. You look like yourself, and you're beautiful. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures to show you, because your father didn't like to be photographed, and cameras were rare at the research plant. Not even a wedding photo? Yes, I did have one, but it was used for his funeral." "How?" "I cut the photo in half and put it on his gravestone." Little Red stared at Zoe, confused. Zoe took a deep breath. What she had said was true, at least so far. The churning in her stomach eased just a little. "Waipo told me that he died of cancer." "What kind of cancer?" "It was caused by exposure to radiation." "Where was the radiation from? Why didn't he stay away from it?" Zoe said nothing. When she left number 221 plant, she'd made up her mind to never talk about her years there, and for the past 3 years, her new job had occupied all her time and energy. Why would she want to think back anyway? Misery, disgust, and fear were all she remembered. The years on the plateau had been a burden she had to bear, nothing more. Bowing her head, she sighed. She'd known this day would come at some point, but before she'd always been able to deflect these questions with a few vague, offhand remarks. Little Red was a clever and inquisitive girl, and would keep probing until she got answers. And although Zoe had pledged to never reveal anything about her work, on nuclear weapons, Little Red had a right to know the truth about her father. Although, perhaps, not the whole truth. Zoe forced a smile and stroked Little Red's hair. We were working for a mining company, far away on the Tibetan plateau. Some of the chemical elements mined there are stable and don't cause any harm, but some are volatile, even explosive, and some are radioactive. They don't look any different, but they are subtle and can kill people in secret. Your father was in charge of security there. He wasn't a scientist, you know. Zoe paused, wondering how much her daughter knew already. Little Red hadn't learned chemistry yet, but she understood and nodded. Father touched those radioactive chemicals and got cancer because he didn't know they were radioactive. Not exactly. A nomadic family had accidentally wandered into a radioactive zone, and he was trying to find them and take them to a safe place. She shuddered at resurrecting the old story, but it was better than explaining the whole truth. She was too scared to face her daughter's tears once she knew that Baba was killed by a nuclear bomb Mama invented. Did he find them and take them to safety? Zoe shook her head. But he was still a hero because he died trying to help others, said Little Red proudly. To other people he was a hero, but to me he was a villain, a monster, Zoe wanted to shout. Instead, she said nothing, her fingers still combing through Little Red's hair. She was grateful that her parents had never asked for details about her life with Major Leo and had given her daughter a happy, innocent childhood. For a moment, she wavered between telling the truth and the urge to protect her daughter. Finally, she simply said, I suppose so. I know you're a nuclear scientist, and Weipo and Weigong told me that you have a degree from an American university. What sort of work did you do at the mining company? Zoe hesitated, searching for a plausible answer. I researched how to use different chemical elements according to their behavior. For example, some uranium is very unstable. When it is bombarded by other particles, it explodes and releases enormous amounts of energy, thousands of times more than any natural process. We call that nuclear energy. And in my job now, we turned it into power, electricity for our daily life. However, the process is risky. In addition to all that energy, it also puts out radiation, which can endanger people's lives. When I grow up, I want to be a nuclear scientist too. I want to find a way to keep people from getting sick from radiation, said Little Red thoughtfully. Little Red seemed satisfied with her answers for now. Zoe smiled and patted her daughter's arm, glad that the conversation had ended on a positive note, and even a bit amazed by her own courage. For the first time, she dared to face the past and had come out unscathed.